Oh, there it is. The yellow. I mean, it's yellow. That's why. Okay, good. Great. Welcome. Hi, everybody. And welcome to our second live session of the day. My name is Dr. Charlotte McCorkadale, chair of the NACYML leadership team. And I am so excited to be here with you and with all these wonderful people that are going to be on our panel for this evening. Let's just take a moment to get to know and meet a few of the people we have with us. Angel, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Angel Barrera with the Center for Ministry Development, and I'm really happy to be with you tonight, and I'm calling in from South Texas.
Bob?
I'm Bob McCarty. I'm the Executive Director of the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry. I'm broadcasting live from right outside Washington, D.C.
Joan?
Hi, I'm Joan Weber with the Center for Ministry Development, and I live in Omaha, Nebraska.
Great, welcome. Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Bull from Colorado. I work with the diocese here and am on the NACYML LT team.
Great. Craig?
Hi, everybody. Sorry that took me a second. I'm on two screens here. My name is Craig Gould. I'm the Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries in the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and I'm on the NACYML LT team.
And Craig will be our communication between what's happening with the live chat that's happening as y'all watch this presentation. So thanks, Craig, for multitasking for us. And then finally, Robert.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Fiducia with St. Mary's Press. I oversee Mission 85, which is the evangelistic outreach part of St. Mary's Press, and I am calling you from Portland, Oregon, actually a brew pub in Portland, Oregon.
You were at a coffee house earlier today. You decided to upgrade to a brew pub.
That's right. It's the full Portland experience, coffee and beer.
There you go. There you go. Well, welcome to all of you. And all of you that are joining us live and for this presentation. So what I'd like to do is ask the panel, if anybody's watching the live session, if you'd make sure and mute that because we can kind of hear that feedback. So if anybody's watching the live session, that'd be great. All right, excellent. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's begin with prayer.
We would just ask as we prepare ourselves to prayer at this time that you would, as we pray, think about maybe a young person that you could think about you're hoping that would have an encounter with Christ. And as we pray this prayer, that you would go ahead and type their name into the chat on the right side so we can all enter in and join in prayer together around our young people. So let's begin our prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
God of our journey, as you walked with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, walk with us during this learning experience. May we encounter you in the listening and the learning, in the sharing and the silence, and in your body gathered in so many places and times. We pray this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Great. Well, thank you very much, Craig. I appreciate that. And so let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to begin by asking the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministries Executive Director, Bob McCarty, to give us a welcome on behalf of the NFCYM, who really helped make this MOOC happen through funding and through helping NACYML obtain some grant funding. Bob?
Yeah, this is a great opportunity. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Federation, NFCYM is a network of 175 dioceses across the United States and 75 collaborating organizations whose mission touches the lives of Catholic teens. So what you're seeing tonight is a collaborative effort. It's the Federation, it's our collaborating partners, and it's NACYML. NACYML is our professional organization within the umbrella of the Federation. This is a significant endeavor. I don't know if you've heard this yet, but we have over 1,300 people who are actually signed up for some part of the MOOC experience. They come from 6 different continents, 150 dioceses, 15 different countries. This is just a great opportunity for us. And I would say this whole topic that we're going to be covering over these weeks together, fostering a culture of encounter with young disciples. Not only does this dovetail exactly with the church's emphasis on the new evangelization, I think more than that, this experience is the new evangelization. The new evangelization, as proclaimed by Pope John Paul II and by Pope Benedict, talk about the same message, the message of Jesus Christ, but with a new ardor and new methods. And so using this MOOC, we are communicating around the world. What a wonderful opportunity for us. We are joined with our colleagues around the world, folks who are committed to fostering the faith of young disciples. So thank you for your participation in this MOOC, and thank you for your pastoral ministry with young Catholics.
All right, great. Thank you, Bob.
Welcome.
So part of our time together tonight, our goal for our time together, is to reflect on the master teacher videos. We're very fortunate tonight to have both Angel and Joan, two of our master teachers from the Center for Ministry Development, who are with us here on the panel. Tom East, the director of the center, he actually is on vacation with his family in Italy, and Bishop Caggiano was supposed to be with us this evening, but he had a last-minute schedule change that prevented him. But we're very excited, Angel and Joan, to have you here, and to have our panel of experts, who I'm going to invite now to share with you just some of their initial reactions, something that maybe struck them as they listened to the master teacher videos that seems particularly important from their perspective in how to foster a culture of encounter with young disciples, and especially this whole theme of transformative missionary discipleship. As you're hearing our panel speak, I'd also like to ask you to type into the chat maybe something that one of the master teachers, any of the four, might have said that really struck you as well. So feel free to share those comments in the chat. And I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Kathy Bull from Colorado Springs. Kathy?
Thanks, Charlotte. The thing that stuck out to me was the joy, obviously joy of the gospel, but to radiate that joy from us and how contagious it is. I believe it was in Bishop Caggiano's video. He talked about St. John Paul II and the newness of methods and using social media to create a community. But not only that, going out to the marginalized, getting out of the box, getting out of that youth group, that one meeting, one way of doing things, and getting out there to the marginalized, those that may not be who you normally see in church, and doing it one at a time, journeying with them, getting dirty, but also including the family. That was the thing that really struck me too, is include the family.
Absolutely. That's an exciting part of what we have going on, Kathy, as you know, as part of the MOOC, is that we actually have a net sourcing community that starts discussion tomorrow. That's all for parents and families about how they foster that. And so I thought that was really a good point as well. So, Robert, how about you? What struck you from your reflections from the master teachers?
I think, to be honest, evangelization, I speak about it a lot. I identify as an evangelist. I would love to be able to pack an auditorium or a stadium filled with young people and preach and have mass conversions a la Billy Graham. That I would love for that to happen. But what I learned from watching the master teachers is that it is the encounter of one-on-one. I said this at the end last time. I'll say at the beginning now, and that is that ministry is not what we're doing in the lives of young people, but it is what God is doing already in the lives of young people. We don't bring God to young people. He's already there and active. What we do is enter into one-on-one intentional relationships with young people, and our job is to call their attention to the work that God's doing in their life. It's small. It's small ball, if I'm going to use like a baseball analogy. Getting into their lives and saying, God is working there. Let's work together to say yes. And I think that's it, is we're not going to find it in a program. I know with new evangelization, I was wanting Rome just to send out a manual and say, this is it, go do it, and you're going to have all kinds of young people coming. but it's small. It's relationships, and then calling the attention to what God's about.
I think that's absolutely true, and I think I heard all of our presenters in some way, shape, or form address that whole concept of that one-on-one encounter and relationship, but especially Bishop Caggiano in his invitation to us. So thanks, Robert. And Bob.
I think the thing that caught my attention in Bishop Caggiano's presentation, he made a point there that what young people want today is exactly the same as what adults want today. And what strikes me about that is that I do believe that there's a deep hunger for the holy in our culture. And it's not just in our young people. I think it's across our generations. I think people are looking to make sense out of their lives. And I think they want to not just hear about the holy, I think they want to touch the holy. And one of the points that I would make based on Bishop Caggiano's presentation and from my experience with young people, they say that for the millennial generation, their criteria for truth is experience. That in order for something to be real, they have to experience it. So that when we talk about creating a culture that fosters an encounter with Jesus Christ, then we have to be asking ourselves the question, are we doing the right things that enable young people not just to hear about Christ, but to literally encounter, to experience Christ as a person, as someone who wants to be in relationship with them. And so this idea of encountering and creating a culture of encounter, I think is going to be predicated on creating those experiences where young people literally can touch the holy, touch the transcendent.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, the three of you, for kind of beginning to point us in a direction there. Craig, can you tell us a little bit about the conversation that's happening in the chat and what struck people about the videos or about maybe the comments of our panel so far?
Sure, Charlotte. You know, people are really reacting to a couple of different things. One was kind of an emphasis on one-on-one ministry, about how important that is, both to kind of lead the way into personal encounter with Christ. They need to have personal encounters with individuals. So people really talk about that and the emphasis on real relationships with folks. The other thing that stuck out is a lot of people really liked the response, I believe it was Robert's comments, where he talked a little bit about folks, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he talked a little bit about you know, how that breaks into one-on-one ministry then, and focusing on individual folks. That just seemed to be a lot of the conversation, as folks liked that pared down sense of ministry and that God was working first, and they got to follow along where God was working at. They really liked that.
Yeah, absolutely. When Robert was talking, it reminded me of the first set of national certification standards we wrote back in the late 80s, early 90s, and we actually had a competency back then. Shows you kind of how the shift of thinking occurs, but we had a competency that we were going to, that youth ministry leaders will put, as in P-U-T, young people into a relationship with Jesus. And it's amazing how, think about that, how bold and how, kind of off-center it seems like when you think about the fact that that's really not really what we believe theologically, that we do believe it's about God's invitation first, and that we're there to help model that. And so what I'd like to do is ask the panel maybe to talk a little bit about that whole modeling of that relationship, that experience of encounter. We spent a lot of time in this afternoon's panel focusing on that, and I really feel like Bishop Caggiano invited us to think more about that in terms of that it's not just about helping the young people have that encounter, but it's about us having that encounter ourselves and having young people see that and understand that. Would someone like to jump in on this conversation?
One thing that's
Joe, thanks. Great.
One thing that struck me was when Bishop Caggiano said, we can't give what we don't have. And when I was a young person, I had a theology professor who had us read the book, The Father is Very Fond of Me. And I just think we need to bring that kind of God talk into our conversations with young people. That, that when something good happens, the Father is very fond of me. Or when something bad happens, the Father is very fond of me. That we keep that message of how intimate our relationship, in a genuine, not phony, but in a genuine way, is, that young people see that is the source of our joy, that's where, that we are sustained by our intimacy with Jesus.
Great. Absolutely. He struck me when he said that as well, that you can't give away what you don't have. It reminded me of my mentor back in Lake Charles, who said to me one time, it was kind of like our motto, that that I'm not going to ask young people to do anything we're not willing to do. And, it meant that I ate so much pizza. I mean, people in my family just hate the fact that I'll never volunteer to order pizza, ever. And if we're ordering pizza, it's because I've protested, but then they always come to me to ask how many pizzas for this many people, because, that's a competency we all have. But that is that reality of being asked to be willing to experience that encounter and be that role model ourselves. Kathy, would you be willing to talk a little bit about how we create these experiences of encounter, both with Jesus and also with his community of disciples and followers, as a diocesan leader or as a parent?
One thing we were talking about at our youth ministry meetings lately has been, we have to convert them first, as well as catechesis. We can't just stuff their head full of all this knowledge when it's not in their heart. And we have to get the head and the heart together. And that's one thing we've asked our youth ministers to work on, is to not only the head, but the heart as well. And, we have knowledge to impart, but we want them to really believe in this knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Angel, I guess I think Tommy's told me that you're a millennial. And he was all excited about hiring a millennial, actually, when he was telling me the story. And I think that one of the questions that has come up in the chat, it looks like, is, how do we not just limit ourselves in the ministry we do to the encounters that we experienced and try to duplicate that we know that Pope Francis is clearly saying, as well as all of the conversation from John Paul II to Pope Benedict, that all that conversation about the new evangelization is that we need to be looking at the whole context of young people's lives. And so I was wondering, both as a millennial, as a parent, and as a youth ministry leader, how you come to understand that, and any advice you'd give people about that.
Sure, thank you. I think there's a real need to, and there's kind of a trend, a swing back to seeing ourselves as a holistic person. I think for a while we compartmentalize ourselves and our time, and I think young people begin to understand that they are one, and understanding their spiritual needs are really important in how that permeates everything in all their relationship and everything that they do. That it's not, church isn't just something I do, it's part of who I am, it's part of who I belong to, it's part of the community, the faith I live in. And I think this call to new evangelization is really an opportunity to reflect. I've still been mulling over, the difference between experience and encounter. And I think for experience, there's a sense that I can have an experience, and it can impact my life, but I think encounter still goes deeper. And I think encounter has this personal, I don't know, implication that I'm changed. And one of the powerful encounters I had, I've had many, was just the whole experience of World Youth Day in Madrid. I think that's part of the importance of what we do as disciples and transforming, our way of doing ministry to reaching our young people, is to reflect and to unpack these experiences, because they're so rich. I think that's a real important part of helping our young people, that they go through so much experience but without a lot of reflection, without a lot of seeking God or having these godly conversations, as Joan was talking about, on where's God moving in our life. And I know in our previous session we talked about how our young people are seeking the holy, and how do we engage young people that are unchurched. I think that, as Bob mentioned, all our young people have that longing for that fire, and it's just our job to kind of walk with them and talk about how God is already present there and working in their lives.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much, Angel. You know, there's been a lot of conversation, it sounds like, in the chat about families and how do we help families create experiences of encounter with their young people, and how do we create experiences of encounter with families themselves. And anybody that has been around Bob McCarty in the past 3, 4, 5 years, if you're around him for just a little time, you're going to hear a story about his grandchildren. I'm just saying that's what he's going to talk about. And so, Bob, I was wondering, as a grandparent and as a parent, and also in your role as the executive director and with the great success that NFCYM has had with strong Catholic families, what advice would you give folks as they think about providing encounters for families and parents and to parents themselves? I think you wrote a book about it.
Yeah, I think we can do this. I want to build on something, if I can, that Angel just said. And I think this is an important distinction, the distinction between encounter and experience. And I'm just making this up, but if I put it on PowerPoint, that'll make it true. I'm starting to think that an encounter is an experience that's been reflected upon. See, I have a concern that young people today and adults today are becoming experience junkies, that they're collecting experiences, but they're not taking the time to reflect on the experience, and therefore they never integrate the experience into their life. So now what does that look like for families? Well, imagine parents who feel uncomfortable, they feel ill-equipped to help their children reflect on experiences. If I would maintain that one of the tasks in pastoral ministry today for all of us is, can we give parents both the confidence and the competence to help pass on faith to their children? And I think the way we pass on faith, and we've used this phrase before, that faith is caught, not taught. So how do we help our children begin to catch our faith? Can we create opportunities for parents and young people to reflect together, to articulate out loud, to practice the words? Can they reflect on their lived experiences? And I would maintain, if they do that, if we all do that, then I think we start to touch the holy. It's like, can you imagine if we created the opportunities for parents and young people to sit together and talk about, tell me a story of an experience that touched your heart. Because as soon as we do that, we are touching the transcendent, because it says in the first letter of John, for God is love. So if we start creating those opportunities, if we help people begin to reflect on those stories, events, experiences that touch their heart, we've moved into the realm of the transcendent. And now we help provide a language so they can see that experience through the lens of faith.
Yeah, it does seem like in some ways we need to give parents permission, and maybe permission is a strong word, but opportunity to have those faith conversations. Wouldn't you say, Bob?
I think creating those opportunities is really a critical task. And to help parents do that, not just in church settings, I would say even more importantly, can we help them do that around their dinner table? Can we create mealtime as sacred time? Can we help parents develop the skill of using mealtime as a way of checking in with their young people, to talk about their faith journeys? Can you imagine teaching them the skill of reading? Thomas Merton said this: you should always read with the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other. So what would happen if we ever encouraged our young people to begin to look at world events through the lens of the gospel? I mean that, what a rich experience that would be for parents and young people to talk together.
Absolutely, thanks. You know, Joan, I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit about, I know that the Center for a number, maybe it was last year, you had a whole series on confirmation, because it seems like to me confirmation is one of those connecting points where we have the opportunity to have young people and parents together. So I was wondering if you all had a chance in your workshops to talk about that, or anything you might share in that area that might help.
Sure. One of the things that we had researched was that the 3 most effective things that we can support families on sharing faith were family faith conversations, family rituals and prayers, and family service. So one of the things in confirmation, since service is part of that, to get families to do service instead of a group of youth, with their youth minister or their catechist or whomever, and then to have families reflect on how did this connect to our faith, how did we live out the call of the gospel, and the conversations, to have parents share with their young people what their confirmation names were and why they chose them, but just to immerse those families in those connections. Which gifts of the Holy Spirit do we struggle to have yet, even as parents? Which ones do we feel are our strengths? Those kinds of conversations, and then just little Holy Spirit rituals, things that are very short and sweet and simple. Because one thing we found was parents don't like to look dumb in front of their young people. So we've got to equip them.
That's really true. That's a really good point there, Joan, for us to think about, in terms of how do we prepare parents to have these conversations to where they can feel comfortable. Because I don't think my parents really felt, I grew up in the 70s. I wouldn't say they felt really comfortable talking about faith to me. They did more talking about faith by their behaviors than they did anything else. And I don't think that's probably as uncommon even today to some extent. But, it seems like to me helping parents, and so as I think about a strategy for that, helping parents have 5 or 6 important faith questions that they are able to answer, like how do I understand Jesus in my life? What does prayer look like for me in the midst of a busy schedule? Why do I believe Jesus died for me and for my sins and for my salvation? Questions like that, I think, are really important, and giving parents a chance to talk about that so that it's not the first time they're saying it to a kid that's rolling their eyes at them, Sure. All right, great. So I was wondering if any of the other parents that we have on the panel here might like to talk about that experience from a parent's point of view in terms of how you do that, or the struggles you've had, or what makes it easy for you. Robert or Kathy, Angel, would any of you like to jump in on that?
The one thing that did come to mind as there was a few comments going on was just the mealtime and how sacred that can be, and we typically don't have meals with strangers, and I think that's because there's a certain vulnerability there that, it's a rather personal thing to eat, and it can be a very messy thing, as I have 2 little boys right now. We're still picking up spaghetti off the floor, and that rolls, to weird spots in the chair. But, I think this is just a very intimate opportunity to engage each other and as we were talking about, it's the pre-evangelization work. It's laying that foundation of building relationship, of showing I have a genuine concern for you, that I care about you, to begin to understand that I could begin to share something so important to me as my faith in Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Angel. Absolutely, that's great. Shifting gears just a little bit, I'm going to throw it over to you in just a second, Craig, to kind of give us some feedback in terms of what folks are saying. But as I'm doing that, I'd like to ask the people that are participating in this live, if you have any specific questions that you'd like our panel to answer, be sure to type those in the live chat so that Craig can share those with us so that we can get that going. But shifting gears just a little bit from family, Robert, I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about the work that you're doing now through St. Mary's Press and the whole use of media and social media and video, and why y'all are deciding to go down this path as you think about providing opportunities for encounter with young people.
Thanks. Yeah. I think most people who've known me and know what I do is I've been general manager of Spirit and Song for a while, and I had been the founding director of St. Meinrad's School of Theology's Youth Liturgical Leadership Program. So I always thought that I was going to be youth and music, youth and worship, but it was I just noticed my own desire to go more into evangelization, and it struck me about a year or 2 ago that I didn't see the church really entering into the space well. And what I mean by the space is the digital space, but also in terms of the conversation. And I read an article called Listening to Young Atheists. And it was all of the nuns, the nons as we've called them. And I saw what they had said the reason why they left were. Somebody had just traveled all around the country, an evangelical minister, went around and he was going to listen to atheists. most of them had grown up in the church, and they left because the message and the mission were vague. And then when pain came up in their life, that's what prompted them to ask questions. And they found atheistic, non-religious answers to make more sense. And I just wanted to say we've got to enter into that space and hit that head on, is not to be afraid of those questions. And this is an anecdote that I share a lot, is when I was in Rio, my cabbie asked me if I was Catholic, and I said yes, and I knew Brazil was a very highly Catholic country. I said, what about you? And he said, I'm not Catholic anymore because I have too many questions that the church can't answer. And sometimes I feel like the church is trying to provide all the answers but make no room for any of the questions. And so that's where it's kind of risky, but that's where I want to go, is to explore those postmodern questions. Did Jesus actually exist? And what does the church have to say about Big Bang and suffering and those kinds of things? So creating space for them, so through the use of digital media, for us to service those questions, to get ahead of the curve, and to be the place, because if we're not the space that young people ask those questions, they'll find it, and it'll make more sense outside of the church than within the church.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert. And next week, we really are going to spend some time in the MOOC classroom, diving in a little bit more into this digital social media, social network culture that we live in as one of the aspects of enculturating the gospel, and how do we go about doing that. So, Craig, can you share maybe a few questions with us?
Yeah, sure. There's some great conversation over here on this side, and folks are really wondering a couple of things. One, about are there any kind of traditional models of religious ed and youth ministry that have been meshed? So, not separate, but have been blended together in something well. We've got some other questions around. Is there models of intergenerational stuff that has really worked well, and specifically things that have also worked with families? People are really, there's a large conversation about family ministry, people recognizing, I think off of the statistics, how important that is. So people are asking a lot about family models, intergenerational things, and changing that mindset from parent drop-off to really being engaged.
Kathy, would you mind jumping in on this conversation about intergenerational models? What's been your experience in Colorado for that, and what's your success been?
One of our parishes does intergenerational religious ed, and while they all gather together at the beginning, then they break out by grade, by level, age, however they break out. Parents, young people, from kindergarten through 12th grade, single people, married people with and without kids, grandparents, all these people together, and they're all learning on the same thing, so that when they go home and get in the car, they can talk about it, or at the dinner table, or wherever it is, so they can talk about it. What did you learn? What did you hear?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. How about Angel, you or Joan? Would one of you mind talking a little bit? I don't know how familiar you all are with John Roberto's work and Faith 2020 and all of what he's doing with regards to family and family practices and that sort of thing. Would either one of you be able to jump in on that?
Well, in my experience here in our diocese, we don't have a lot of instances of intergenerational models like that in a formal sense. But I do think that there's a lot of intergenerational ministry happening, especially around popular devotions and just kind of the livelihood of the faith communities. So especially, I mean, to hear Grandma talk about her faith and when she would come to the basilica or come to the shrine and pray is a faith experience and a teaching and a catechesis there that happens with children and with all different ages and in a family context. And so that's been our experience, is that it's much more organic. It's a much more lived experience, especially the popular devotion feasts like Our Lady of Guadalupe. I mean, you have families, waking up really early in the morning to welcome, and celebrate Our Lady. And I think that's much more of what I've seen rather than a structural response of classes and things like that, at least in this area. I am aware it happens, but it's just not something that I've seen a lot of here.
Okay, great. Thanks. Bob?
Oh, funny you should ask. First, I want to remind us that programs are a means to an end. I know that when I was new in youth ministry, I wanted somebody to hand me the program in a box that was going to be the cure-all for everything I was trying to do with young people. Well, that doesn't exist. And so I've learned to relax a little bit about a specific program. But what I would recommend is that people who are pastoral leaders, think of faith holistically. Think of faith as having a head, heart, and hands dimension. There's a cognitive, there's an affective part, and there's a behavioral part to faith. And so one of the things I would suggest in our parishes and our schools, I think it's worth asking the question, what are we doing here that deepens our young people's understanding of Jesus? That's the cognitive dimension. What are we doing that actually puts young people into an experience, into an encounter with Jesus? That's the affective dimension, the heart. And what are we doing that allows them to live out that commitment through justice and service, through service in the parish, by participating in liturgical ministries? That's the hand dimension. And I find that using that head, heart, and hands kind of image is a nice way to assess our program. But I would say this about young people. You have head, heart, and hands, but right in the middle of that triad, I would add a fourth H for home. I think young people are looking for a spiritual home. I think they're looking for a place where they belong, where they can raise the great questions with adults who are willing to listen to the questions, and rather than give them a packaged answer, help those young people search out their responses. And so it's the new Catholic 4H, head, heart, hands, and home.
Thanks. Head, 4H. I like it. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, it seems like there is some conversation happening in the chat there, a little bit about that whole balance. How do we create a balance between with parents or with maybe priests, pastors who are saying to us, you need to provide more content, you need to move away from this experiential approach. I mean, it does seem like to me with this whole conversation about encounter and relationship, especially from Evangelii Gaudium, that we're really being invited in some ways to go back to the 70s to some extent, where I think we had a large emphasis on this whole idea of relationship. Now, obviously, we can't go back to the 70s. We can wear 70s clothes, and I see lots of people doing that and thinking it's cool, and it still doesn't even look cool then. It didn't look that cool back in the 70s, and today it doesn't look that much more cool. But the point is that I don't think we can go back. But I do think it does tell us a little bit about ministry being cyclical, and that sometimes we tend to say, well, we didn't do this well, so we let the pendulum swing to that end. And then we say, well, we didn't do that well, and so we let the pendulum swing back to the other end. And so it does seem like that whole concept of balance is one that is really being called for in many ways. Robert, could you talk just a little bit about that in terms of this whole kind of content?
Yeah. I absolutely love theology. It turns my crank like nothing else does, except for maybe Mad Men, but that's a different talk. But here's the thing: is why do we preserve church teaching, and why is orthodoxy important to preserve church teaching as it is and to pass it on? Is because it has the impact to answer humanity's need for salvation. But we think that, well, we'll just stuff this inside of them, and then when questions come up, then it'll be relevant. That's not my experience. My experience is that if you talk to the pain of young people, then that's your opportunity to bring church teaching into it. Why is my heart so broken when I fully gave myself to my boyfriend or girlfriend? Well, it's because you were made for one person. Here's the church teaching, and here's why it makes sense about monogamy and theology of the body and all of that. I'm feeling a need to. My love for Jesus isn't enough. Well, let me talk about the Eucharist and the real presence. We have to go to the felt need. We can't just open up their heads and pour it in. If we address the needs, the felt needs of young people, then we're going to have the opportunity to share the beauty and the fullness of church teaching. But if we do it the other way around, then it just becomes a history lesson and it bores them to dust.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, would you like to jump in on this conversation and maybe provide, from your perspective, a closing comment in terms of what your takeaway is right now?
I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, one of the blessings of being in youth ministry for a very long time is I've seen that whole pendulum. We started out with the experiential approach to youth ministry, to religious ed, to fostering faith. And it was all about the experience itself. And then we moved towards the information phase. We shifted the other way, saying, oh, there's not enough content. So we moved to the information kind of approach. I would maintain we have to get a balance between experience and information, and I would call it the formation. I think we need a formation approach to apprenticeship in the community that is holistic, that is head, heart, and hands. I think for today's young people, I think more important than our theologians is our mystics. See, I think in the Catholic tradition, we have this mystical tradition that we don't tap enough. Mystics are those who have an experiential knowledge of spiritual things. And so I think young people are looking for that kind of an experience. So I would maintain, given this whole conversation that we're having here tonight, that it's not either or, it's both and, but it's all about the starting point. And I would maintain that we have to first engage the hearts of our young people if we ever expect to educate their heads. Absolutely.
We can't answer questions that they don't quite have yet. Angel, would you like to go next in terms of offering some closing comments? And I want to invite also the folks out there that are watching live, if you wouldn't mind typing into the chat, just your one takeaway from this conversation and maybe from the Master Teacher videos. So, Angel?
Sure. In the portion that I spoke about in the last part of Chapter 1, I think one of the phrases that's just still resonates with me is fragrance of the gospel. And again, just talking about that imagery of the gospel having this beautiful fragrance and something that you become saturated in. And I just think of how you can only gain that through experience, through encounter. And that's something that lingers. That's something that people can sense on you, in you, around you, without you having to speak. And I think that's a really important phrase that the Holy Father uses for us to use as part of the way we do ministry. Is we need to be totally immersed in the life of our young people, totally immersed, so we have the smell of the sheep, and totally immersed in the life of the church of Jesus Christ, so that we have both smells, the fragrance of the gospel and the smell of the sheep.
Absolutely, thanks. Kathy, how about you? A closing comment?
One thing we didn't touch on that I really think is important is it's not just the young people who are searching, it's their parents as well. And we need to give that opportunity to growth to them as well. Knowledge of the Lord, we need to be welcoming and inclusive. And I think Bishop Caggiano spoke to that in his video about renewal of parish life. Becomes dynamic with right worship, intellectually engaging people. So I think that's something we need to think about, as well as reaching outside the box. We've always done it this way. On one of the videos, it was someone was talking about, they always have this retreat this weekend every year, and they were missing people, so they went out to those little pockets and gave 3-hour retreats to the soccer team or the track team or the dancers. And so we have to think outside the box.
Right. And that was Tom that said that, and he really made that big emphasis on going to young people. And I think you're absolutely right. That story struck me as well, in terms of kind of a paradigm shift that maybe we're being called to think about. So thanks, Kathy. And now, Robert, a closing thought?
Yeah, I think it would be just to piggyback on what Kathy and what Charlotte, you guys have said, and that's, I think the biggest challenge of Evangelii Gaudium, it is to see ourselves not as program directors anymore, but the canonical responsibility of what it means to be a parish director of youth ministry. And I was thinking about this earlier, that there was a shift from ministering to people who come to our youth group to then shifting to the people who are registered in our parish. You know, because I had like 100 coming on a night when I was a parish youth minister, but I had 440 registered in my parish. I had to get out of the mindset of my youth group to the parish, to the registered. Now I think what the Holy Father's challenging us to is it's not those who are registered in your parish, although yes, but it is the parish, the canonical, broader understanding, the universal understanding of parish, that it is the mission field, it's a territory. We have territories, as our parishes are territories for a reason, and that is for the pastoral care, the material and spiritual care of everyone who lives within our boundaries. So parish is not a campus. We need to go out to the peripheries, to those parish boundaries. It's manageable.
Yeah, even if it takes us to a brew pub in Washington, right, or Oregon, right. And Joan, how about you? A closing thought? And Joan, you know, we haven't really talked at all about service, so you might be having a variety of closing thoughts there, but I do think it would be interesting to if you wouldn't mind, in your closing thoughts, adding in a little bit about this whole concept of missionary discipleship, because I think that's the substantial thing in Chapter 1 that Pope Francis really hits home on in terms of what this kind of encounter looks like. What it results in that missionary disciple. So, Joan? Joan, you're on mute.
Thank you. Okay. I really believe that service can be that transformational experience in a young person's life. And what I was going to say kind of folds in with this. I think we have to let young people know that they provide us with encounters with Christ. I look back on, I started teaching, I was a religion teacher in my very first life, 22-year-old farm girl teaching city 18-year-olds, not very pretty picture there, but they helped me to understand God's love better. And we don't tell that to young people enough, especially the angry ones, the disenchanted ones. They sometimes can be that holy encounter. I think of Dorothy Day saying, you know, the poor, those who have nothing left to give, they are my meeting place with God. But we need to let them know that. And I think service is one way in which that vulnerability is there. When young people recognize they went to serve and they got much more back from the people they thought they were going to save than they gave, that's such a powerful opportunity for that encounter to become real.
Absolutely. That's really a great point. Well, thanks so much. And so, Craig, I'll give you the final word before we begin to fast forward to what the rest of this first MOOC week will look like. So, Craig, would you like to share a little bit about what the chat's going on and what the live participants are saying?
Yeah, sure, I would. And specifically because most folks a lot of folks liked Bob's 4-H comment, the heads, heart, the hands, and the home, and a lot of conversation about holistic approaches to ministry that includes both the whole young person, so every part of the young person, and then also every part of their lives. So not just the individual young person, but also the families and the larger communities at which they're a part of. That's what a lot of folks just trying to start to imagine what would that look like to think about engaging a young person at those deepest levels. And the other part that they really enjoyed was that distinction between encounter and experience, and really allowing for an encounter. And what does that mean that's different to have an encounter rather than just to have an experience? And some reflection on Bob's talk about reflection, how theological reflection maybe helps folks to do that. But really like that. But overall, a lot of conversation about parents, families, and engaging the whole part of the young person.
Thank you. So that's great. Well, thank all of you for participating. And I hope we can continue these conversations. And in the MOOC course site, we have a bunch of net sourcing learning communities, and we're really excited about that. And this is really where we can begin to get into some of the more practical conversations. So if you'd like to continue this conversation about family and parents, make sure you make a thread or pose a question to your learning community and tell them that let's talk about this. What are some ideas? How does this work for you? And again, with some of the other ideas that have come forth, if you could take some time to do that as well. I want to make sure, too, that you help us spread the news about the things we're learning and thinking about in this intentional dialogue that's taken place around the world, literally around the world, about Evangelii Gaudium and about spreading the joy of the gospel with young people. And so you can do that by joining us on social media and sharing what you're learning on social media with the folks that are following you. So we're using hashtag NACYML MOOC. We have a Pinterest board, we're tweeting about it, and we have a Facebook page. And so please get in on the conversation there, but also please continue to forward and share the different, and retweet the things that we're putting out there so that people around you can say, hey, what's going on and what are you talking about, and maybe how we can talk about this together. So from Wednesday to Saturday, we're having these net sourcing communities. On Saturday, we'll post up week 2, and so you might not see week 2 right now. You shouldn't, but it'll come, and week 2 will become our focal point, and we'll regather next Tuesday at 1 o'clock p.m. and 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time for these conversations. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us for this MOOC. It's not too late to invite people to be a part of this, so please spread the word if you'd like to do that. Thank you very much to the panel. Y'all were excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Very, very good. It's been great having a chance to have these conversations with all of you twice in one day. I feel very blessed because of that. Thank you, everyone. Take care, and we'll sign off now. We'll keep the chat open, though, for the next 15 minutes for those who want to join in. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you.
If y'all would just stay